presentation today is on my approach to discussions in classrooms, both face-to-face and online. And I just want to share some of my ideas with you about that. And this is bizarre because if I go to here, it goes behind. So, what I would like you to do by way of getting started, and there's an odd number of people, so someone's going to have to work in a group of three. Maybe the three of you can real quickly. Just find out the answers to these questions. What is your partner's full name? What do they like about the subject they teach? And what have they learned about teaching that subject that would help other teachers? Or what's a tip they have in their class, okay? And we'll take a real quick, just go through it real quickly because it's just to make, we're going to do something with this later. So.
Okay. Okay. So I am Kathy Schride. I teach writing 121 here. Because there's a lot of them though. There's a lot of things that I like. I like the flexibility of lesson plans.
I've interrupted your discussions just in the interest of moving on. In a regular class, I might ask you to then share with your partner how their last answer relates to what you teach and how you could use that idea or that tip in your own classroom. I'll ask you just to kind of think about that as you go through. We're going to use this in just a moment. I want you to be thinking too, which was easiest to answer, which did you talk more freely about, and which one stopped to make you think. And I'm telling you that we're going to use this in the future because the research also shows that anticipation helps learning. And so one of the tricks you can use is at the end of the class say, oh, I want to be sure to tell you about what happened at Seneca Falls. Oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I'll tell you as soon as we get back together, okay? So what happens in the brain is the brain goes, oh, I want to know that. Brains don't like empty spaces. And so even if they don't think about it at all, the Harvard study showed that the students that came back and you said, oh, I was going to tell you about Seneca Falls, the brain goes, oh, yes. Some students come back going, she was going to tell us about that. Some students are like, oh, yeah, she was going to tell us about that. But that the lasting learning, the learning was anchored better when there had been some anticipation of it. And so we'll get to that in a moment. What I found with discussions in classrooms is that often giving students, I want them to discuss, it's helpful for the auditory learners, it anchors information in the brain better. I always want students to have a chance to discuss and to reinforce information. But they tended to discuss classroom topics the same way they discuss what they're doing on a weekend. And often the discussions themselves, within about a minute, ended up with them talking about what they were going to do on a weekend. And then it was, that group's done, this group is just getting started, someplace in the middle, and then what happens to the group that's already done? And had they really discussed it, or did one person kind of come forward, say enough that everyone, their response was, yeah, I agree. Or, well, no, because my mom didn't have that happen when she did something, and their research of one, their N of one, becomes the refuted, that's the, so I realized I really needed something more in terms of, do you want me to, okay, sure. I really needed something more to help students get to a meteor or something more in their discussions. And I realized that I had to, if I wanted that, I had to teach them not only what I wanted them to get to, but then how to do it. And so I'm going to share two things. One is what I look for in discussions, and then, or first I'm going to talk about asking good questions, real probative questions, because I think that's an art that's gone away too, if it ever was an art, I'm not sure. But let's assume there was one. And so I'm going to share that with you, and then I'm going to go into just my little trick about using scavenger hunt approach. And the first thing I teach students, and I use the first week of classes to teach these kinds of things, because sometimes students are getting their books, and it's a part of the orientation, and I found out that if I spend time working on this first, it's easier for them to move in and add what they learn from the books or whatever, the text or whatever I add to it. But students can get this approach within a couple of classes. And so if you look back on, if we go back to that very first part, typically the easiest question is the first one, because it's what I call and response. Closed question you, and there's a handout about the difference between closed and open questions. Closed, there's an answer. What date did this happen? Who said such and such? Who wrote the book? That kind of thing. What's your name? And so those, if you'll go to the little page on the different levels of questioning, it's got little pictures on it. If you'll hold this, I suppose I should take it. It would be easy if I did this. Take a copy myself and put it up on the screen so you could see. Duh. So the first thing I look at is just what I call the different levels of good questioning. So the first level I talk about, you're just going to taste it. There's no heavy thinking in it. It's what's your name? Who directed the play? Where does this happen in the body? And there are reasons to have closed questions. Just if you're going to a doctor, where does it hurt is an important question. If you're buying something, how much does it cost is an important closed question. You don't want to negotiate that kind of stuff. So they have a purpose, but it doesn't take much to do. It's just like getting a quick taste of something. Level 2, I want you to bite into it. These kinds of questions have to do with usually taking something and putting it together. One of the courses I teach is women's studies. So it might be something about what was the purpose of Abigail's letters to John. Okay, so they have to think about it a little bit. They know that there were some letters. What was the relationship between this and that? And it may be something that's not automatically in the text, which is a level 1. I've got to put a couple of things together. I have to have read the whole story, or I have to have been in the discussion to be able to pull things together. And so I'm going to combine those into an answer. This is also very helpful. You want to know that they have read and understood the material. So what is the connection? The problem with the level 2 question is often this is the level of discussion that's asked of them. And it's opinion. And so it becomes sort of what I call the op-ed piece. As soon as somebody shares an opinion, then it's just a matter, do I agree with your opinion or I disagree with your opinion? And human nature is such that people don't like to disagree, so they just sort of, yeah, you're right. And then they sit back and that's the end of the discussion. Unless you have a list of 20 questions to discuss, it can easily deteriorate there also. So that's very similar to what did you talk freely about? Most often that second question about what you like about what you teach is something that, okay, well, I have to think about that, and you start to tell something, and then you kind of tell your history, and you kind of expand that way. But I could ask that of anybody. They don't have to have been in any particular training to answer that question. And so a lot of times the discussions in classes become more opinion that people can kind of fudge. They didn't read it. Well, I'll wait and see what Brandy said, and then I'll go, oh yeah, and then something he said sort of reminds me of something, and I can kind of have to really know it. So the third level is what I call chewing. Now I want you to get in there and really bite down on it and start to get the flavors of it and stuff like that. And that's the question that I ask you to put yourself in that situation. So in my example, it might be something like, what letter would you write to John as a woman today? So if you were to put yourself in the position of Abigail Adams in the 21st century, what letter would you write to the husband John? She writes a letter that is popularly known as Remember the Ladies, because that's her statement in there. And so if you were in that position, what would you do? Now, you have to know what we're talking about, and you have to put yourself in that spot. So now I can't just it's still an opinion, but I'm looking at it from a very different perspective. I have some other examples here. Or something like, how has your life been changed because of Abigail's letter and the insistence that one remember the ladies? So again, I'm putting myself and recognizing, okay, so she wrote this letter. What difference did that make to me? I'm looking at this at a very different perspective. Level 4, and I didn't have you do this, but I just mentioned it for you, is I really want you to digest it. Now I want you to apply it. And here I use the picture of the cow because I don't know if you know about cows' stomachs. Kathy, what do you know about a cow's stomach?
No, it just sounds like, I can picture them chewing,
Chewing on
but
it.
I don't know that I ever
Somebody
pictured
know about
it, Josh.
Healy?
Yeah, I used to work at a vet school. So
All right, you know.
So they had a cow that had a surgical hole in it. Like it was completely sterile, but it was like so you could see, that they were chewing. But yeah,
They have two stomachs.
They actually they have one stomach with, it actually goes through the process 4 times. So they chew it, it comes back up, they get some old saliva or some actual enzyme, goes back and chewing it. And so of course, if you're teaching the class before lunch, this is it's fun for students. But it's also fun for students to go, oh, I get it. And so when we talk about ruminating, in your brain, that's what it comes from. It has to do with that chewing over and over again. I'm hoping that the question that asked you, that the last question where I wanted you to take what tips you got from others and think about how you would apply those in your own class, would be something that you might be driving home going, well, how do I do that? Or what tip would I give somebody? How do you keep chewing on it? And so this is where I want them to apply it. And so, again, to use the example, it was something like, who in your life has been supportive in a way that Abigail wished to be supported? Or what legislation would you like to see enacted to better support you today? Now I have to know what the letter is about. I have to know what was going on at the time, and I have to apply it to my life now. And here's one of the most fun in a face-to-face class. Ask them to tweet each other about the discussion. Use the technology. And if they don't have their phones, just have them to write out what they would tweet. And then share that. It's like, well, what did, Randy, what did you tweet Kathy? Or Kathy, what did you get from Randy? Kind of stuff.
Can you do that?
Huh?
People in class can just tweet each other?
They're doing it.
Oh,
Yeah, they're doing it.
Text each other.
They're texting. And texting would be another way to do it. Texting,
Okay,
tweeting.
text.
Yeah.
But they'd have to have each other's phone numbers.
But it doesn't take long for, as we set this up, I'll talk about setup, but that's a good example of, you just want to set it up and say, it's one of the things I do in the class, so, and it doesn't, you could tweet a friend or text a friend, and then just tell us what you texted.
Okay.
So I don't have to text Randy. I could text my friend John and then just say, here's what I texted him, and then share what I texted. And then, of course, now I've texted in a different way. Now John's going to want to know, and I'm going to talk with John about that discussion too.
Yeah, let's just tweet it out.
Yeah, so now I've expanded it in that way. So, so students can follow up with a collective letter, for example. Maybe as a group, then you're going to compose a letter to a legislator. What legislator would be interested in that? For instance, in my psych in the workplace, I have them write letters of complaint. And then I put them together in a boardroom. And, Ed, you're the CEO, and Kathy, you're the CFO, and Keely, you're the director of advertising, and now here's your letters of complaint. Which ones do you pay attention to? What's good about this and where do you feel defensive? All that kind of stuff. So, because that's psych in the workplace, those are things that you're going to run into. And so, so put them in that position. And boy, the discussions go, right? Just a little sideline. One of the things I will do to help students too, and I always carry my little toolbox here, but a deck of cards for helping you divide students into groups is wonderful. Because I can say, 5 of you, and there's 25 in the group, give each one of you 1 through 5, and so all the 1s get together over here, and then after all the 2s, all the 3s, all the 4s, and then after that, I go, okay, I want all the hearts to get together, or I want all the odd numbers and the even numbers to get together. There are a lot of ways you can share that around, and so that's just a real easy, and then it's not, the same one. And I think I mentioned to add in another situation where this class is not too bad for getting people to move around, but don't hesitate to have people stand and discuss things. We stand and discuss issues all the time. So if you've got one of those classrooms that doesn't lend itself nicely, and then I will say things like, I want you to discuss this, find a partner, and you have to step 3 steps away from where you're sitting now and find a partner. so that they don't just automatically turn to their friends and the people they're sitting next to, that kind of thing. So I will assign perspectives. This is one of my favorite things too. So I'm going to use history as an example here, and Ed can correct me if I'm off base, but maybe group 1, we're going to discuss what's a battle or an issue in the Revolutionary War. It's your area, isn't it?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
How much do you?
Well, I just said battle. Just tell me a battle. One of the battles.
Battle of Virgin Capes. It's a
Okay.
naval battle.
Okay, the Battle of Virgin Capes. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. This is exciting because I've never heard of it. I'm going to go look it up. So, group 1, you're the revolutionaries. Group 2, you're the Brits. Group 3, you're the naval, the soldiers. Group 3, or group 4, let's see, who else do we have?
French Admiralty.
The French Admiralty, great. Group 5 might be, might be some, maybe you're the farmers there, But what would you care about? Maybe you're the town criers or the journalists of the day. What are you looking for? So the first thing I'll have them do is meet as a whole group and just discuss it as a group. What are we going to be looking for? Or what are our issues? Okay, so that's group 1, then group 2, then group 3. You all list them in, you have some time to talk about that. Now I'm going to blend the groups. So a person from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get together and I want you to discuss this battle. Now I have everybody at the table, or at least 5 different perspectives. And there's some magic rule about 3 to 5. So if you can't come up with 3 or 5, use 4. But just putting people in a situation where they have to think about it from somebody's perspective, some different perspective. Oh, I never thought about the French in the Revolutionary War. I know they were there. It's like, I never thought about the British soldiers on colonial land, or the mothers of the British soldiers back in England, or the people who are writing about it for the newspaper or getting the word out. Body part, what about, I want you to be thinking about it in your own classes, but I'm thinking stress management. What if you talked about stress from what's your head telling you? What's your body telling you? What would your, what you emotionally thinking about, telling you? And so you're going through this stressful situation. What are the different parts of the body? But rather than me saying, this is what my body says, that group of body parts, that group is the emotionals, and you get that collective of discussions. Okay? What are some other things that you teach that you might be able to do that with?
Well, I was just thinking about addiction pharmacology and physiology. I could have some students looking at drug addiction from the addict's point of view, and someone from the family member's point of view, from the legal point of view,
Perfect.
from the school. Oh, this would be a really rich kind of.
And that's where I use it in psych class for disorder.
Yeah.
Just like that. It's like, okay, so what if you're the school system?
Yeah.
What if you're what if you're the mother?
Right.
The person who has the disorder, that kind of stuff. It's great. How about something in anthropology or writing? Or Randy, what do you teach?
Writing.
Writing, okay. So,
I'm struggling with this for our Writing 227 class, which is very much technical writing and process oriented. But in like the 115 or 121 class, where we read essays and discuss them as models, we could do a role where you talk about the essay as the model, what's the structure of it. And over here you can talk about what's the point, what's the content.
who reads technical writing?
Users.
So you might have a user
So
group,
we
you
might
might
have
have
a
the
user group,
publisher, you
right.
might have, just different.
Your primary users here, your secondary users here, your author here, and your reviewer.
So it might be
here.
something like that.
And
How
the
about-
Yourself and back in.
The teachers who are grading it.
That, absolutely, and I'd like to do something like the French or the town criers, because it's somebody they never think about. So something like, well, maybe you're the punctuation. I want to talk about it I want to be well represented here. Don't forget me. You know, something oddball that reminds them to think about that aspect also. How about for anthropology?
Well, I'm typing it to myself so I can remember it actually. Like just teaching them about stereotypes and working in the field, like how cultural anthropologists approach it. So I could have like a group be the missionary group, have a group be the indigenous group, have a group be the government,
Yes.
NGOs, etc. So I'm like,
Oh,
before I
NGOs.
forget, I've got to get it down.
Well, and the other thing is connect past with present. So years ago, you were talking about being older than your students. I'm old. I play volleyball with the students. I'm old enough to be their grandmother. That's a shocker. But I remember a program years ago by Steve Allen called Meeting of the Minds.
Yes.
Thank you.
That
Thank
show.
you. And he would have the show was that he would have different actors portray different people from different centuries.
Yeah.
So Da Vinci might be talking with an astronaut and Steve Jobs around a table, and they might be talking about innovation, but they also might be talking about civil liberties,
Yeah.
something outside of it. And as your enthusiasm matches mine because it's that kind of thing. So in anthropology, you might have you might be talking about the people at the time, what they wanted to leave behind, and the anthropologists today, or the scientists of tomorrow, or whatever, and just kind of anything that gets them to stretch and think about it from a different side. It's sort of the Far Side cartoon kind of thing. One of my favorites is there's a series, and it has the cows eating. No, the cows are standing around talking. And then one of them says, "A car!" And then they go to grazing as the car goes by, and as the car goes by, they get up and they're talking again. So it's like just a different perspective. So that's the kind of thing I like to do with that. A couple of things about the question levels here is what it gets down to is really going away from just the who, what, when, where, how to who else, why else, where else, what else, when else, that kind of thing. And I have my own notes here. Here it is. I have my personal bias or prejudice against why questions. Go ahead. What is your...
Well, I use this in my interviewing theory and technique class because a why question could start to build defenses.
Mhm.
People could think, well, now I have to explain myself. Or
Exactly.
do that. So
Mhm.
you better use, would you tell me, or can you tell me,
Mhm.
or what did you mean by that?
I think they are false probatives. They suggest that we're going to look deeper, but they're really back to cause and response. Why is this? Because this. Well, why? Because why? And if you've ever been around a 4 or 5-year-old,
Yeah.
you know that routine. And unless you have somebody really able to step in and change that, it becomes sort of this floating why and deteriorates rapidly. And as you're saying, as Wenda's saying, it's real easy for people to, because this, and then somebody challenges it or doesn't mean to challenge, but says, well, why do you say that?
Yeah.
Or, and then exactly, then you're just defending it rather than really thinking it through. And so to get out of their own head and think about it from somebody else's perspective and to really avoid that circular why. So I don't let them use those kinds. They have their place, but that's not in my stuff. Okay? Let's see. I have had math instructors use students talking from the perspective of the x-intersect and the y-intersect and the curve that comes through and that where they meet, and so how they got there. Well, I did this, and so it helps students understand the flow of the math, and so you can use it any place. Now, to get to the whole scavenger hunt piece, I start by asking, and I'll ask you if anyone, what's your experience of scavenger hunts?
I've done one in years.
Pardon me? Haven't done one in years, but
Yeah.
you have had one,
I'm
okay?
sure I did as a child,
Okay.
or saw it.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, where you're going for it or drawing a
Okay, anybody else?
Aren't you given you're supposed to go to a certain place and then you find your clue? Or am I thinking something else? You open
That's a
the door-
variation on it.
Okay.
And I appreciate that because variation is what we're gonna do with it here.
Okay.
We used to do that for Christmas presents.
Ah.
A little bitty Christmas present, they open it up and it's a clue, go look here.
Uh-huh.
And run all over the place because the thing was too big to wrap anyway.
Oh, yes,
Five
okay,
minutes,
that's
go look
right.
in the barn, or go look in the trunk of the car, and
Right.
there it is.
Okay, so you're doing just what I have the students do, kind of talk about it, and usually somebody has done them, they know basic form, but there are variations on it, so we talk about the variations. In principle, you're given something to find. That's the goal, is you're going to find something. And you're given either clues to do it, or you're given a list. And then you're sent out in groups to go find these things. And you come back, and the goal is typically to bring back the most of something. Okay, so if you're supposed to find things on the list, the group that comes back in that amount of time with the most things on the list wins. Or the group that comes back with the most, usually if you're given a clue, you go pick up little pieces of something or get something stamped so that you come back with the most of those kinds of things, okay? So, excuse me, this is the kind of thing that I look at in terms of discussions also. Your goal is to find the most you can about this. In your group, the winning group is the one that's going to have the most responses to this. Now, imagine that you're given a specific list. So then the goal is just to go get what's on the list and to find out how many things you can, right? But then I'll broaden it and say, well, maybe I give you a broad category. Like say I want you to go find as many plumbing things as you can find, okay? On the one hand, this is helpful because, well, you narrows your search, you know? Not gonna go out to the farm, the backyard. I'm gonna go to the plumbing, the plumbing store, or going to go to where we can keep our plumbing utensils and stuff like that. But I can add to it by saying the prize goes to the most unusual plumbing item that people bring in. So there's a prize for bringing in the most and the most unusual, or the smallest, or the most intricate, or something like that. So I just add a piece because then, as a group, you're not only going in search of it, you're having to make decisions. You're having to talk about where and how to do it and that kind of thing. So the good news is it's more focused. The bad news for you is that you have to discuss and you have to start thinking of specifics, analyzing it. Here you can have an opinion, but now your opinion has a purpose. Because you're going to add to the discussion about which ones to choose and which not, or where you can go to get it, why you would go there. So this is what I like to do with students, and this is the thing that I teach them also. They now know how to ask questions, and I want them now in their discussions, the questions I ask, I want them to come up with the most perspectives or the most questions that they would ask, or the most information about it from a particular perspective or whatever. And I'll actually have them then either chart it on the board, or I'll go around and ask group 1 to respond, group 2, group 3, add to something in it. And so then, okay, they don't have anything more to say, but group 5 came up with 3 more things, clearly the winner, kind of stuff. And, I usually throw out some candy kisses or something like that to the group of students, like that kind of thing, and it's inexpensive to reinforce it. But it doesn't take long for students to realize, oh, I'm not going to sit idly in this discussion. I'm working to help my team go. Now, when I have them report out, someone different from the group shares. Even if they consult and say, Kathy's already spoken, and Keely's already spoken, and Ed has already spoken, Wanda's already spoken, and so Randy's one of the shyer people, so he's letting them do all the talking, but, we're going around, and it's his turn, and he's like, what do I say? And they say, tell him this. That's okay. I just want to hear Randy's voice. Let's see. I take this one step further, and I'll have you share these. So if you'd be willing to assist me here. I use the, excuse me, nice of all 5 of you to come. I use the acronym, or ALERT. I want you to be alert in discussions. And so I outline what your role within the discussion is. And this might be probably not a discussion where they've taken on a particular role, because I don't want them to get too overwhelmed with different roles. But this is if we're having an open discussion about something, I want you to think about what role you play in this. And I found that when students have a role to play in the group, they pay more attention to what's going on in the group. So the first letter of the word is A, and that stands for assister. If you're the assister in the group, Randy, would you read what your role is?
As a group assister, my main role is to get and keep the discussion going. I ask others questions and organize the discussion. Some ways to do this are to introduce the topic, ask what the key points are, and when the discussion wanes, I ask who else, what else, where else, how else, and when else questions.
Okay. So if your role is the assister, you're moving it along. Okay. Who's L?
That's me.
Kathy. And what are you?
I'm a listener.
Okay.
As a group listener, my main role is to listen for who is speaking and to make sure that everyone takes a turn. Some ways that I do this are to mentally track who is speaking and how often, paraphrase what others have already said, and encourage everyone to make a comment by asking their opinion or observation.
Okay. Remind me to tell you all about the Moreno technique in teaching this too. So, okay. So you might, now everyone's supposed to listen. Everyone's supposed to assist. But now somebody is kind of tracking that. Okay. The group dynamics, you know. GwenEllyn here is hogging the conversation. And I don't say that. I just say, thank you, but Wanda, what do you think about this? You haven't said anything. Okay, now I'm putting some pressure on you. You're kind of taking on the role that an instructor would, but you're teaching students how to do that. And they can use these techniques any place. Okay, so now we have the A for alert, or assister. We have the L for listener. The E comes next. That's the expander.
So as a group expander, my main role is to note how the discussion relates to previous discussions and to make these connections for the group. Some ways that I do this are to relate what is being said to what has been studied in the textbook or other readings, relate what is being said to previous discussions in class, share the thread or ideas that keep coming up in the discussions that tie them all together, or ask questions of everyone that helps them say more about what they are thinking, or ask questions that will help clarify what has been discussed.
Okay, and most often they start out with something that simple. Can you clarify that? And I said, even if you understand it, ask that question, because it helps everybody to rehear it, you know, and the person who said it to kind of clarify. So they're learning these techniques as they go along. I don't expect them to just know it, and some people come in with better skills than others. But as they take turns being this person, having this role in the discussions throughout the term, they get a chance to explore that aspect of it. Okay? So that's the E, the expander. And then we have the R.
The reflector. As a group reflector, my main role is to listen to what others are saying and to clarify the key points by explaining them in my own words. I also summarize the threads that link the discussion to the lesson. I find common ground. Some ways that I do this are to repeat what others have said to be sure that everyone understands their points, and listen for ideas that everyone has in common and to point them out to the group.
And I'm thinking about this as you read that. There's an exercise that they work on, but also I will stop and say, you know, as we're about to finish, has everybody on the team had a chance to, you know, fulfill their role? And so sometimes the reflector's like, oh wait, I got to tell you this, or you know, the assister might say, well, I didn't say this, I want to say that kind of thing. And finally, we have the T. Bring it to a T.
That's the tracker. So the main role of the tracker is to keep the discussion on track so that the group completes the discussion thoroughly and on time.
So need that.
Keeping them on focus. So how to do that? Mentally track the time my group is spending on each question. Remind the group members when the time is getting short or a question is taking time from another question. And encourage everyone to make their comments brief but clear.
Now, when they get a chance to practice these, again, I will have them start by all of the assisters get together. I mean, this is when I'm teaching them. Not every, once they learn this, then we just go into pick a role in your group or I assign a role. But in the beginning, okay, all the assisters get together, all the trackers get together. What are questions you would ask? How would you deal with this situation? So they get some experience in their own words about, well, if I were the reflector, what would I say? How would I do that? What's an example of how that happens? So they get some experience doing it. And then you'd be surprised how quickly they catch on. And of course there's always somebody who's kind of a little less, engaged in it. But typically students start to get engaged. And as you see, there's a handout that has, that shares their questions at the end.
The reflection sheet?
Yes. It comes, I hand this out at the same time to them so that they actually have to kind of analyze their own participation.
It's on the back.
Yes, it should be on the back of it. So your name and your role and topic, and I'll have them hand this in. So what was your group's strengths? What are your group's areas for improvement? What are your strengths? What are your areas for improvement? And comment on your success in fulfilling the role you were assigned. So they start to have a little bit more invested. And that's something that I have them hand in more so that they think more about it than just to kind of reflect. Or I'll do a journal activity or something like that on it. Okay. I want you to know I do this in stages, so I don't give them this all. But within the first, I would say after the second week, they're really pretty adept at it. And they're starting to hold each other accountable. And I know you're the tracker. That kind of stuff.
Do you have them keep the same role all term?
No.
Or they
No, I want them to have an experience of being each time. And some, I've done this typically by take a role that you haven't had. And it usually somebody, it's like that gets moved around. And, sometimes all the letters aren't in the group. So somebody has to double up. Or there's only 4 in your discussion, and so, all of you are going to have to be all of those things or something like that.
So how do you do it in stages?
In stages, I mean that I start the first day of class, I do similar to what I talked about. I'll teach them how to ask questions. And we have a chance to do that. And then the next time we meet, I'll ask them to meet and ask questions. I'll give them some prompts. So we'll take something like, again, I'll go back to, we'll actually use Abigail's letter. Remember the ladies, and then I will give them some prompts to discuss around that, and they'll get an opportunity to ask level 1, level 2, level 3 questions, and then to talk about how they would apply those. And then I might introduce them in that group. We might expand that then to looking at, well, if you were Abigail, if you were John, if you were, somebody else. And so I just kind of, that's the stages. And so I don't give them, you're getting it all at once, but I have them have an opportunity. Plus, I have other things, I have it within the context of teaching. So I've got a subject to get in there also, but this is how I introduce it. And so then they get a chance to do it. They get a chance to repeat it. They get a chance to talk about what worked well, what didn't work, that kind of stuff. And this helps because they're not really evaluating each other in the group. They are, but they're not saying, oh, Kathy's left off. She didn't do anything. I can just say, my group did this really well, but what we need is more work on the assister, or we need more work on listening, or whatever it is. And so it's a way that they can learn to self-evaluate their role also, and to look at what's comfortable. Okay, that's how you got to teach. I'm just going to go through some tips now, and I can send you these. I encourage students to bring perspectives from outside, so I do what I call a show and tell assignment, like when you're a little kid in kindergarten, you bring something. And so, and I can send you the outline for this, but it may be something they were listening to on the radio or saw on the news or whatever. It's like, oh, that's like what we were talking about in class. And so they bring that back, and just like a show and tell, they stand up in front of the group or online, they just share it with the group. It's in the link. It's, this is what it is. So if someone wanted to find it, or it was a discussion with my roommate, it was what I tweeted, it was whatever. This is a quick summary of it, so those two things don't count for much. This is how it relates back to the lesson, and this is how it applies to my life. So I have them do 2 of those a turn. I might, in the groups, have them come up with, real quickly, what are the 3 key points of this reading, or what are the 3 key points of your discussion, or whatever. I will have them create slogans. So those French military naval guys, create your slogan that represents what you're standing for. The revolutionaries, create your slogan, what you're standing for. That kind of thing. The indigenous people, create a slogan. They like this kind of stuff, too. It's just one of those. And then I post those on the wall, it's just like that kind of stuff.
Which handout are we looking at?
This is just some tips. I'm sorry. Thank you. This is a fun one for the students, and I have to be real clear about it, but I have stump the teacher questions. So come up with a question you think I can't answer. But it can't be, like something I don't know anything about, but it's just like, but then they have to practice the level 3 questions, that kind of stuff. So it can't just be a simple answer kind of thing. It's got to be something like that. So the other tips that I'll just briefly hit on, because I know you have to go here, is setup is everything. As I said, I do this in stages. I spend a lot of time on it in the front end of the course because it just pays off. I can give them at the end, and that's always the difficulty, is like, what do you separate? But because I allow for about a week for students to get their textbooks, and in the summertime especially, because you can't get financial aid until after July 1st by federal law, and classes start at the end of June. So a lot of students come in without a textbook, so this is a good time to practice these and anything else I want them to know. I use names. I had to use name tags, and I have students use named cards or name tags, and to refer to you by name. Not when I was talking to, what's your name again? Not when I was talking to her, but when Keely said this, it made me think about that. Now, there are 2 reasons for that. One is just respectful, but for Keely, she goes, oh, someone paid attention to what I was saying. You know yourself, and I mentioned it earlier before you came in, is that sometimes you can be in a group of people and you hear your name over there, you hear your name. And so you pay better attention when you know that somebody's going to be talking and referencing you. And as a teacher, if somebody says something really fantastic, I will usually write their name on the board. And then one student told me one time, she said, I used to dread that because when I was a kid, teachers wrote your name on the board if you did something wrong. So I started saying, if I write your name on the board, I want you to know it's because I think you said something really great. So the goal is to get your name on the board. So I had to explain that. I mentioned you can stand to discuss. I mentioned I wanted to be sure and talk about the Moreno technique and the fishbowl technique. The Moreno technique is where you have a group of people and everybody has a partner. And people sit in sort of it doesn't have to be, but you sit in a circle and the partners are behind them. And so say Kathy and I are partners, and as Kathy's talking, she's giving her information to the group. I might think of something and I say, Kathy, don't forget to tell them this. So she's got a partner that's kind of feeding her information. I may not say anything. I may say she's doing just fine, but it's a way of, I'm paying attention now to what Kathy and everyone else is saying, but Kathy also has somebody else to help her out right on the spot. The fishbowl technique is that same group discusses and the group outside says nothing but listens, and then you switch places and the outside group takes the stage and discusses it, and the inside group observes and listens. And that's another way of having them pay closer attention to what's going on in the discussion. And then you can have a larger discussion about what they heard, what they missed. And of course, the group on the outside is going, I want to be sure and say this and this and this. Dealing with respectful controversy, I think you can be a model for that by accepting what students have to say and finding where it fits in. sometimes I'll have the representatives from the group, so group 1, have somebody come up and write your key points on the board, and group 2, write your key points on the board, and then that's a way that everybody sees them out there, and then we can discuss them. And I mentioned that I ask students in each group to report out, just to keep people all involved so that you can't just sit back. And so, when you arrive, you have the expectations clearly pointed out that you're going to be in an interactive class and you're going to be responsible at many levels, and so the better prepared you come, the easier it is. Now, I will say this, that there's a word for flipping, and that is that if you typically showed movies and things like that, if you can put them on your website, all faculty have a web presence, and have students watch them outside the class and come back, you've got much more free time to discuss what's in class. And so instead of showing the movie in class, have them watch it outside of class, or clips of it or whatever. And that's, they're just finding, teachers are finding that students want to watch movies when they're home. that they'll do. Reading books, not so much, but go watch a movie, go watch something. If it's available, or you can embed it or link them to it in your web presence, it's a great way to flip the course so that when they come to class, they've already seen it, and now you can discuss it. I see lights going on in Ed's.
Well, there was this one class where I had a face-to-face class, and the guys at Schmeggin Online made me a shell for that, because I had a shell when I used it for online class. And I asked the kids, would you like to partake in that online part? And most of them said no. Not just no, but heck no. So I gave up on that idea, but now I could put other stuff in there besides, my big bowls of text.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The way I started out with online is I had a web presence, and I had online classes, but most of my classes were face-to-face, and I would just post homework there, so if you didn't come to class, it was there. I didn't have to carry extra papers. If I had handouts that I wanted you to fill out, because I have students do a chapter summary, and they fill out a form, it's there. So if you're in class or you're not in class, I didn't have to print out 130 to cover the term. I just said, go get it there. I could post extra things, little games to, because there's all kinds of things like that out on the internet. Extra things or extra articles they could go and do extra credit for, or just rather than to print it out and have 40 copies, 3 pages, it's there. So another thing I taught them right away, I would take them to the lab and say, here's how you get to this course. And so it was part of the course, and it was part of what, now I teach it, and students can upload all kinds of things, and I teach them how to do that, but at that point I didn't have them uploading anything. It was just that. I'm also, this summer, I'm going to have my Psych in the Workplace students do their free websites. They can create their own website, and I'm going to have them post things there and create their portfolio online. And because Psych in the Workplace, they can use that out, as sort of their resume also of things they've done, but it's all in one spot then too, and I don't have to keep finding myself.
Kind of makes the assumption that some of these students, that all of the students have some kind of ability.
Well, the nice thing about this is that's why I take them to the Tech Hub, and of course they have access to technology on campus. And the portfolio issue is that I found this really simple. Like, I did it, 9-year-olds do it in 5 minutes, their parents do it in about 25 minutes, but expectations being different. That it's real easy to do. And there too, my plan is to do it in stages, because currently I have them go out and find this website, and they just post it in the discussion area. So I'll still have them do that. They go out and find this and they post it. It's like, and then I'll teach them how to create this web page, and they can post it there. And they can start posting little by little. So I'll scaffold it so that they're not suddenly dumped with this. But
Nice.
yeah, so I was going to test it out. This will be fun. So I used up my time, but if you have questions, my email address is Gwen@Chemeketa. I go by GwenEllyn, but please, yes.
You mentioned something about, it's better to have 3 or 5.
Yeah.
Why is that?
The brain likes odd numbers. I think it's because I think it's more open-ended with odd numbers than closed, than,
So it's not like one side against another, it's kind of.
well, yeah, and that's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's part of it. The other thing I will tell you, I forgot to tell you this, is that when I teach students to discuss, and I have them sitting, it's knees to knees. And this is hard for them to get used to. But none of this shoulder on the side and that kind of stuff. It's knees to knees, the best ability. So this group wouldn't work. You'd have to, force yourself to get knees to knees. And you don't have to touch knees to knees, but you want to face knees to knees so that everybody can see everyone's face. Everybody is collected. And if someone new comes, you move around, knees to knees, that kind of stuff. So some of those kinds of setups I want to make sure students have too. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you
I have
coming,
more fun
Kathy. Sorry, I
today.
know, and thank you for reading.